Good to go? All right.
Good. Okay. All right. I call to order this joint work session on May 21st, 2024, with the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Parks Board. Let's all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome, Planning Commissioners and Park Board members. We are excited tonight to go over our draft comprehensive plan, solicit some feedback and some directional comments from the boards and commissions here this evening. But first, since we have two groups together, I think it might be a good idea to go around and just state your name and the ward in which you represent before we get started, just so we're all familiar.
Forget. Okay, I'm Kelly Pfizer, and I'm from Ward 1.
Jim Peterman, Ward 2.
Eric Smith, Ward 4.
Mario Urquia, Ward 2.
Ken Cooper, Ward 2.
Bill Manson, Ward 2.
Chris Scott, Ward 3.
Lauren Shanks, Ward 4.
Jerry Faulkner, Ward 3. Ignore the fact that it says William on the name tag.
Steve Troutman, Ward 4.
Patrick Keys, Ward 1.
Eric Bowie, Ward 1. Just walked in.
Chris Turnbow, Mayor and Liaison to the Council to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Excellent. Well, thank you all again for your time this evening. We have a little bit of a tag team presentation between Mr. Eppert, myself, and Mr. Mustine to kind of go through the layout, the structure, and some of the content of the comprehensive plan as it relates to some of the land use items and development items for the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Parks and Recreation and Trail System for the Park Board. Before we get too far into the discussion, I wanted to kind of outline kind of the phase in the process that we're in right now, what we're here to accomplish tonight, and where we intend to go after this meeting this evening. So over the past couple of years now, at this point, as you'll hear later in our presentation, the three of us and a couple other members from each of our departments have been working to put together a draft plan and working with our consultant, Olson. Okay, you're right. With Olson, who's our consultant on this project, to take all the work that staff has put together in kind of a draft structure format and make it look pretty and readable in the document that you have in front of you this evening. And so the three of us and several other staff members have worked to compile a bunch of information about where we think the city is headed over the next 20 or so years. Did a lot of analysis of our previously adopted plans and some other market research in conjunction with our consultant that we are excited to share with you this evening. So tonight, we're here to solicit some feedback primarily on the content of the plan. There's a reasonable expectation that there probably are some typos, misspellings within the plan. We are still combing through some of that ourselves. But the purpose of tonight is just to elicit the directional feedback from you all, whether or not are we headed in the right direction? Are there areas that we've missed that you all would like us to think about a little more or differently? After tonight, between the Park Board and Planning and Zoning Commission, we have presented this kind of in draft format to the city manager as well, so that you all are the first board and commission to see this. After tonight, we'll gather your all feedback, kind of summarize it into a report. We'll then move on to the city council for another in-depth review with them. Following that, we will take all the feedback that we've gathered and go back to the drawing boards with our consultant and our staff team, make any additions or revisions to the plan. Following that, we'll put it together in its final format and bring it back to each board and commission individually for formal adoption before it makes its way finally to the city council. So that kind of summarizes where we're at right now. You'll see behind me is kind of a outline of a PowerPoint. Feel free to follow along with that. It does have references to different page numbers within the plan itself. So if there are any questions, feel free to interrupt at any time and interject. Wanted to go over just a little bit of kind of the direction of the plan and the history of where we've been. As the Planning and Zoning Commission knows, the original growth management plan was adopted in 2004. through various updates, most recently in 2013, is the document that we've used since then to make growth decisions for the city. And then with respect to the Parks Board, I know you all have had various plans for your individual parks, the park system overall, adopted over the last couple of years as well, with some of the newer parks going in the last couple of years. The first direction that we got, that we took with this comprehensive plan is that we wanted it to be a plan of plans. And so better integrating all of the master plans that we have for individual parks, facilities, and areas of the city into one comprehensive document. We held an initial kickoff meeting with the city council back in November of 2020 to kind of set the stage with where we were headed and kind of the work we were teeing up to work on with our consultant. One of the things that we tried to really make prevalent within this document is that it carries the momentum from some of the successes that our strategic plan has had, whether that's infrastructure projects. We have had numerous GO bond projects, special obligation bond projects, a lot of infrastructure and growth that has happened under the guise of the strategic plan. And so you'll see some of the similarities in the structure and some of the things that are kind of repeated in this plan tonight. It is the other thing that we focused on is a community-oriented plan, but it is staff-driven and developed. And so what we were hoping to accomplish with that is that we didn't seek to hire a consultant to come in and tell us what it is that we needed over the next 20 years. We set the stage for that, and then we worked with the consultant to kind of put it all together into one plan. We had several different people that wrote different portions of the document, and so the consultant's job was to take that, kind of reorganize it in a way that made more sense and make it sound like one cohesive document, which is what you all have in front of you this evening. So I wanted to provide a kind of an overview on how we intend to split the presentation up, kind of doing a little bit of introduction and kind of going over the information that sets the stage for the plan overall, is what I'll cover here in the next couple of slides. Mr. Eppert will provide kind of an overview of the organization of the plan in terms of the different pillars, the goals and the strategies and some of the framework plans that are within that. Mr. Mustine will provide a pretty in-depth review of the parks plan specifically, which was structured as kind of a standalone plan within the overall document as well. And then we will kind of wrap it all up with some implementation and kind of where we intend to go next after this plan is adopted. So kind of touching on the groundwork for the plan, going into some of the information that we analyzed early on. This group is probably familiar with the community conversations that we've held over the last several years, a couple different iterations of that meeting, gathering feedback from the community. I will touch on some of the themes that we developed out of the reports from those meetings. In addition to the ETC survey that we get every year or every other year in some cases, a lot of good feedback within that about where the city is excelling and where residents think we need to focus on improvement. And then in addition, with respect to the activity centers that we'll touch on later on, as well as our transportation corridors, we also did kind of a digital mapping exercise where we allowed residents to basically drop a point or a pin on a map that we created and provide some feedback on what type of development they would like to see there in the future, or with respect to road corridors, what things they would like to see improved over the next 20 years. In addition to the community engagement, as part of our project with our consultant, we are also afforded the opportunity to do a real estate market analysis, and I'll go into a little more depth on that about where Raymore is from a growth standpoint historically, and then where it's likely that we'll head between now and 2045. And then, as I mentioned, we also did an in-depth analysis of some of our previously adopted plans, the growth management plan, the Trails Master Plan, our original town neighborhood plan, and try to give a good summary of things that have been completed and things that are still kind of needing to be done. And we tried really hard to bake that into some of the goal statements and the strategies that you'll find later on in the plan. And so to kind of touch on a little bit in more detail, wanted to provide some of the themes and overall major findings that we found in some of those reports. So with respect to the community conversations, if you all recall, that was a project that we worked on in conjunction with the University of Kansas. And so through all the feedback that we collected with that, they were able to provide us with a very good summary of the comments and information that we received out of that. Three of the key themes or areas of focus that came out of that is that in terms of where residents thought we should focus our efforts moving forward with respect to growth, is preserving the hometown feel that Raymore has, kind of a small town feel with bigger city amenities. Focusing on business attraction and retention, so growing our tax base within the city, and then focusing on trail expansion and maintenance. We have a good asset in our trails system, And so residents were really interested in preserving that and keeping that momentum going forward. With respect to the ETC surveys, for the major findings that we found out of that, and these were the areas that the city found that we were doing well in based on the feedback from our residents, was we have a high quality of life here in Raymore. Residents value public safety, and the city values public safety within our police department. Our services and amenities within our different facilities and departments is a big priority for our residents as well as the overall image of the city in terms of how it's taken care of, how it grows, what our developments look like, and so forth. So those were kind of the summaries of our different engagement events. Within your plan too, towards the back, you'll see two different appendices. That provides a full summary of some of the things that I just talked about here as well. And then in addition to some of the data, we also looked at, with the help of our consultant, different patterns in the history of our land use and zoning decisions over the last 20, 30 years. An analysis of our current housing stock, different housing types, and what makes up the 10,000 or so households that we have in Raymore right now. Our infrastructure with respect to its age and newer infrastructure projects that the city's taken on, an analysis of our parks and trails, as well as different census and demographic information. So all that kind of summarizes what I'll provide here on the next page, which is a summary of all of that information. So there were really kind of 5 key points that we kind of kept coming back to as we were drafting this plan. Is the housing market in Raymore is a huge asset. We've experienced pretty tremendous housing growth since the growth management plan was initially adopted. Through our different, make sure you see that. Through our different GeoBond projects and capital improvement projects, we have a very reliable and fairly young network of infrastructure, meaning we're very equipped for growth when it comes to things like traffic and water and sewer. We have a strong asset in our regional and local parks and trails. That was evident in a lot of the feedback that we got in our engagement. Raymore, both the city and the residents, prioritize safety through the different community programs, community policing, and all the great things that our police department does for the city. And then in addition, we've seen a lot of business growth, honestly in the last 5 years alone, but especially between 2013 and now with the addition of several new major employers and small businesses as well. So I wanted to kind of stop there before I get into more detail to see if there's any questions or clarifications that we can make. All right. So what I wanted to spend a little time on next before Mr. Eppert goes into some of the goal statements is some of the data of how we kind of set the stage for how we set some of the priorities for the plan. So what you see here before you is kind of a summary of the market report that our consultant provided, and it took historic growth, historic building permit information, and kind of made some projections on between now and 2045, what can Raymore expect to see. So you'll see between now and 2045, we are expected to see between just below 11,000 and just above 12,000 new residents, either move to the city or locate to the city in one way, shape, or form. What that translates to in terms of housing growth is we can expect to see between just over 5,000 and just below, above 5,600 new housing units overall. And we'll kind of talk about how, what direction the different boards and commissions think we should take in terms of how that is achieved through different housing units and different housing types. And then in addition, between our retail and commercial growth, we are expected to support between 583,000 and 684,000 square feet of new retail space across the city. And so the 2 charts you see on this page are kind of broken out to different housing types. You'll see that is our existing housing inventory. We have just over 10,000 housing units categorized between detached single-family units, which is your traditional single-family home, duplexes and fourplexes, and then apartment units. And so those are the percentages as they exist today. And one of the things we hope to kind of get out of this process is some targets for where the Planning and Zoning Commission, Park Board, and City Council hope for us to be at by the time we get to 2045 with those mix of different ratios. The next chart over, you'll see in terms of acreage in the city, what that equates to in terms of retail commercial development, office space, single-family residential, and then kind of mixed residential between apartments, townhomes, duplexes, and so forth, kind of on a conservative basis and an optimistic basis for what that equates to in land area. So between 85 and 95 acres of commercial retail office, 75 to 85 acres of mixed residential, not including detached single-family, detached single-family residential, where we expect to experience just over about 1,200 more acres of single-family neighborhoods in the city. One of the things, two of the questions that we're hoping to kind of answer within the frame of this is how should the city be growing residentially? Where do we want to focus our attention? Is it more detached single-family neighborhoods? Is it a mix of that and apartment complexes? How should we start targeting those housing type ratios over the next 10 to 15 years to move the needle on those different housing products in the city? And then addition to that, how should we be focusing our commercial growth? As you see here, between retail and office, a pretty good amount of acreage that can be developed between now and 2045. What you'll see within the land use plan that Mr. Eppert will touch on, within the activity centers that we've pointed out, there's approximately 220 acres of land available, kind of on the larger parcels scattered throughout the city. And so our intention with that is there's really no need to grow outward within the city if we have 220 acres within the city that we have to focus on for development as we move forward. So I wanted to touch a little bit on the housing growth and kind of how we arrived at the numbers that we did there. As I mentioned, we can expect between 5,100 and 5,600 plus or minus new residents or housing units within the city. So I broke down in this table kind of how we get to that. What you'll see in terms of people moving into Raymore, meaning moving from a different city to Raymore, would be the lion's share of those units. So just over 4,000 to 4,600 new housing units that are generated by people moving to the city for one reason or another. In addition to that, you have the latent demand of people who are just looking to move around the city, whether they're upsizing to a larger home or downsizing to a smaller home or moving from a large house into an apartment. People who want to stay in Raymore but have to find a new house or apartment for one reason or another can expect about 1,000, just over 1,000 new units to be generated because of that. And so that's kind of how we arrived at what our growth forecast is expected to be between now and 2045. And again, our hope is to kind of get some direction from our boards and commissions on what should that look like between now and 2045 in terms of different housing types. With respect to retail and commercial growth, just wanted to point out some of the things that were highlighted in our real estate market report. Since 2010, about 153,000 square feet of new square feet of building area has been constructed, while 167 square feet of retail space has been absorbed. And so that includes the backfilling of vacant spaces that have become vacant over the years. But you can see that the development that we have had over the last couple of years, we have a very low vacancy rate within the city, which is good and bad, which I'll kind of elaborate here with the next point. Our retail space inventory has operated at a very low vacancy rate, which is good because we don't have vacant buildings throughout the city that are sitting there dilapidated, but it's also a barrier for local businesses or smaller businesses that are trying to locate into the city, because in order to be here, they have to find that one space that's available or build something new. And so what we don't see is a lot of business location here into vacant spaces because we really don't have any right now. In addition, two kind of metrics that our consultant looked at was the trade area capture. In short form, that is the number of shoppers basically in the city at any given time. How many residents or people that don't live in Raymore are shopping within the city. So you can see there, we have a population of just about 24,000, just under 18,000 people are shopping within the city. And so that equates to the fact that people are having to shop outside of the city. If that number was greater than our population, you'd have an influx of people coming into Raymore to do their shopping. So the fact that that is lower means people are having to go somewhere else to do the shopping that they need to do. In addition, the pull factor, which indicates it's basically that trade area capture number divided by the population, and it just indicates where those sales might be going. And so with a pull factor of 0.74 below 1, again, Raymore is experiencing significant retail leakage, which means, again, people are having to shop outside of our boundaries to go find the stuff that they want to shop for, which bodes well for the fact that we have a lot of space to grow and a lot of potential for new development over the next handful of years. And so I wanted to, as I kind of tee up Mr. Eppert to take over, wanted to structure this into kind of how we took those findings and put it all together in a plan that kind of made sense based on kind of what I mentioned with the strategic plan and some of the direction that we were trying to keep. So what Dylan's going to explain is kind of the organizing elements of what the plan and how it's organized. We took the method of trying to start from the top with very broad statements and work our way down to the implementation of the plan. So what you'll find in the document is 12, we call them big goals, but they're overarching kind of priorities or goal statements that really help us move the needle on everything that you find in the plan. Those are all categorized into 4 pillars, which I'll describe those here in just a moment. But again, the intent of that was to build on the progress in the direction that was created with the strategic plan and basically identify new targets for our city as we move forward, and help create that long-term framework for the city moving forward. So this page here really summarizes how this plan ties to the strategic plan. It was structured around the fact that it's a reiteration of the 4 strategic areas of the strategic plan, but they're broadened because we're capturing a lot more with our different boards and commissions in this plan than we were able to with the strategic plan. And so you'll see, for example, community identity connections has been transformed into the different values of the community. And each of these are kind of summarized, which Dylan will go into a little bit more detail on. But the structure of this really allows for the current strategic plan, which still does have some life left into it with some of the goals that are in that. It allows it to be tied a little bit more clearly to the comprehensive plan, which is a lot more broad, and either allows the city council to continue to update that plan either under the current structure or if they wish to kind of morph that into something similar to the comprehensive plan. We wanted to keep the relationship of those two kind of separate but related. And so I will, unless there are any questions on the framework of the plan and some of the data that we looked at to put into it, I'm happy to answer those questions before we go on.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Did the consultant go over what they anticipate the 2024 budget for the city to look like? Did you look at like what the ratios or the percentages of retail and commercial and residential, like how that needs to maybe be sliced in order to get us to the budget that the city will need by that time?
Not necessarily, only because that wasn't initially in the scope of what we were hoping to get to at this point. It's hard to tell since we don't know what the sales taxes will be out of that 683,000 square feet. It's hard to put a number to that, and so we didn't want to really set any expectations with respect to a budget per se and then not be able to meet them. It also plays into the fact that with the direction we're seeking on the different types of housing units and different mix of land uses, that could vary from one year to the next, and so that was not necessarily a projection that we looked at. But we could if that was important to.
I just didn't know if there was ratios we were trying to stay in just from a solvency standpoint. If we got too heavy on residential, for example, would that create financial problems? And like, where do we need to kind of stay in order to be like financially set for the future too?
I think so. I think that's part of the next conversation we hope to have with the city council. Because each year, I mean, construction activity is a budgetary item that you look at in terms of how many new home permits are we going to expect for this year? How many commercial permits are we going to expect? And then there's a value, obviously, that we assign to that. It is worth looking into, though, because, communities that are 100% single family have a lot of challenges that communities that have a better mix of retail and commercial don't have. And so that's certainly, I think, part of the discussion with the city council is, what are those growth targets that we want to aim for, and then what are the repercussions of that, or what are the outcomes that we can expect if it's 100% single-family growth, or 50-50, or 25-75. So I think we will get to that based on our discussions moving forward, but was not necessarily something we had at this point in the plan.
Sort of like which came first, the chicken or the egg. If we go to demographics, which you need, that drives commerce. Because the more people you have, the more likely you are to get better businesses in here because they're interested in the customer base. So the thing is, how much do we do on the housing aspect? And demographically, I would probably say that what you were looking at up there was 70% single-family dwellings with a 10% actual land, but you had a mixture of multifamily dwellings, dual dwellings, plus your apartments. I think that's probably overall best way to go. We do need to have rental in there because there's a lot of people that want to move here, but they don't want to buy. Part of that's the interest rate at the current level. And we need to have that affordable housing that comes in with people that choose to rent for a while, then they'll buy. So first off, I to say what I believe is we need to look at the housing because that's going to drive our commerce. And then in commerce, I just like the idea that occasionally big box operators bring in traffic. Of course, we'll never get a Costco here. I'd like to see one. But still, that's one of the ideas is how we're looking at demographics.
I think you'll find in some of the information that Mr. Eppert will share on some of the overarching goals, there is, the section on housing does deal with our diversity of housing, which we just touched on, as well as in that diversity by type, diversity by rent level, by ownership, occupancy. As it stands today, we've always hovered around 80% owner occupied, 20% renter occupied. And it really hasn't fluctuated that much with our growth that we've seen over the last couple of years. But I do think that's another target that could be set in our discussions with this of what, I mean, that's a measure you can keep track of with the census and different surveys that they put out annually. And so that's definitely a metric that we could track and use that to make decisions on based on zoning requests, development decisions, and things along those lines. Any other questions on that?
Quick. So kind of piggybacking on both their comments, do we know then from a revenue standpoint what type of, call it, tax income is generated from single-family, multifamily, apartment, and then retail, commercial, industrial, and like what percentage of our budget is made up by those varying entities as far as what they pay in? Because I think, too, if we're looking at what we're going to use with the space as far as being able to cover the costs of maintaining our parks, the city, the roads, that is going to be vital to being able to support some of these targets that we're doing. You got to have the funds to be able to have a safe city and pay our police department and all those things. So do we know what that breakdown looks like currently? And I know you mentioned you don't have anything from a budget standpoint, but do we at least know generally, historically, what those different areas have generated from an income standpoint for the city?
I know in general for the budget, that's kind of an aggregate number of what we receive from property taxes, sales taxes, and so forth. So that's a very high-level answer to your question there. That is information. The census tells you different information on the valuations of property, the median home value, and things like that. So you can pull that information in. The average home value times however many single-family homes that we have. There are calculations that you can do based on that, and I do think it's wise. You'll see further on in the plan, there's a lot of language about tying our land use decisions to the budget, making decisions based on the impact on the budget. Those are all overarching goal statements that we've put into this, but not to the level of detail in terms of getting that data today. But I think that's something we could look at moving forward as we make those decisions, because that is all information that we have readily available, either through the assessor's office, through the different agreements that we have with our warehouse developments. We know what those pilot payments will be and the tax payments are every year, and the same with some of our apartments. So some of those are known values, and then some of them are kind of up and down in fluctuation based on what the property is assessed at. So definitely an analysis we can look into further as we look to try and implement the plan. Well, if there are no additional questions on the background, I will pass it over to Mr. Eppert to kind of go through the different 12 broad goals. And again, feel free to stop us at any time and ask any questions that you have.
Thank you, sir. So again, just to kind of give a brief overview, 12 big goals is what I'll be going over initially, and then I'll be following up that with the land use and development framework. As Mr. Gress mentioned, there are 12 big goals that are characterized by 4 pillars that came out of the 2018 strategic plan. And you'll notice that within the plan, all those big goals are outlined or color-coded to match those pillars, as well as on the PowerPoint behind me. Those goals are outlined with the pillars that correlate back and forth. So let's see. One of the big things, I guess, before I get jumping into the goals is look at the goals as like a 10,000 foot view. And then the strategies within those goals, about 5,000. And then as we get further in the presentation with implementation, that's essentially our ground level view. And so those are going to be the things that we're working for. So just kind of a picture as I'm going through these. And then obviously if there's any questions as I go, definitely feel free to interrupt me. With Big Goal 1, managing external impressions of the community to position Raymore as a leader in the region. There were 3 really broad, I guess, subsections within that goal, and that's livability, public art, and inclusive recreation. Within the livability, we highlighted community for all ages, which we are a gold level city. And so that's something where we've now transitioned from having a master plan to having a lot of those goals within there, within the plan achieved. And so we're now looking and exploring more opportunities to create a more inclusive environment within the city of Raymore. The AARP Livability Index is also something that I think Board Member Manson had kind of mentioned, with really just obtainable housing and affordable housing. That is something that is, with AARP, they make a grading system, and you can look at that every year. And so that's something within the plan that is our goal to look at either annually or biannually, to see how we're matching up against comparative cities. And so they look at housing and transportation and health and a number of items. And then aging in place, one of the initiatives that we've supported and have actually had a pilot program back in 2021 was a universal design program there in Knoll Creek. And so we're actually looking to try and implement that a little more broadly, as opposed to just a very specific home, looking at more residential subdivisions and how can we either incentivize that or just make it a requirement within the city to ensure that we're capturing all potential and existing residents within the city. Public art, city beautification was a number of items that we highlighted, one being arts and parks, the murals. So you'll notice if you go out to Rep Park in 2018, there was a mural kind of on the concession stand. And then entrance features such as the seed pod there at the Cadence property, Dean and 58. Any questions on Big Goal 1? Moving to Big Goal 2, providing opportunities for residents and community members to be engaged in the process of the city. The 2 big highlights for us were in community involvement and communications. One of the items that was highlighted in there was, how do we capture everyone in the city? So not everybody has the ability for technology or the ability to get all of our things that we push out on social media. And so exploring those options to make sure that everyone has a voice and can participate within our public processes. The other one is just communications. We do a great job already with just sending out the review by our communications department. We also do a weekly and monthly report on everything that's going on in the city, but where's the missing middle? Or is there a gap that we need to fill? And exploring those options to make sure that everyone is accounted for. Any questions with Goal 2?
So Dylan, let me ask you a question. It's because I get emails all the time from vendors pushing their product. Normally I hit delete on a lot of them because some of them were already our action items for our staff. Others are kind of pie in the sky type issues. But there is one that keeps recurring, and that is an organization that is able to, at our whim, put out a notice fairly quickly to our community and get feedback fairly quickly on that particular issue. Have we looked at those types of vendors and those kinds of quick turnaround inputs that we've looked at or have pursued that might be a part of this process for the communications section? I mean, our comms unit does a great job of pushing information out. We don't do a great job of gathering information in, and I'm wondering if that's a software suite that might be useful for us, for any of these boards or commissions, to even push out inquiries, then they can get back 400 or 500 almost immediate responses to what is being considered. And whether or not that's useful, I've seen some communities have been overwhelmed with things that they cannot afford, naturally, but there are others that have utilized that information to make modifications to their plan quickly to ensure that they're not going in a wrong direction because they haven't gotten that information. So I'm curious as to whether or not you all get the same emails I do.
We most definitely get the same emails, and more often than not, it's vendors that are trying to sell a software or something of that nature. And when you upgrade a software through the budget process as an expansion item, you're not really in the market for something new already. And so definitely something we can look at. And I know through the comprehensive plan, that is a goal for us to be looking more specifically for that. And so definitely something to keep our eye out for.
I think in addition to that, one example that comes to mind that has worked really well for the city, and this is just with respect to code enforcement where it lands in our department, is the Text.my.gov platform that our communication department uses. And that is a lot, I feel like, easier to use than go into your computer, write an email, waiting for somebody to read it, send it back. And so in terms of real-time communication on issues, I know that platform has worked very well to get the text, look at what we've done on the property, or go inspect the property, and then text them right back, and they get it right there on their phone. So I do think that is worth adding into this section. The other thing that came to mind is we brought up the community conversations originally. I know the software and the tools that KU utilized for that, albeit it was in a big group setting, so not necessarily along the same lines of what I think you're asking for, but I'm certain there's technology out there that we could be looking to utilize. Facebook is one option, but I'm sure there's others as well to get the real-time question and then pretty quick feedback on a decision.
Well, what I'm curious about is utilizing what we have available to us already and promoting that's, I assume we put an ad in the review, so people might browse through that and see it and latch onto it. Others may just be looking at pictures. I don't know. But as we move along, I think that is one area we could do a better job of, is promoting what tools we have already to get that information from our community. Okay? See what I'm saying? All right. That's right. I appreciate that. Does anybody have anything different on that, or any aspect to that I'm off base, or you think we could expand on? Okay.
Okay, so moving on to page 50, this will be goal 3. Ensure public safety through the community-oriented police department, focused on citizen engagement and outreach. A lot of what you'll see on this PowerPoint slide is things that we already do. Community programming for HOAs, Neighborhood Watch, Citizen Police Academy. Those are all programs that we already do. One of the new items that you'll see kind of that came out of the comprehensive plan is CPTED, and that might be a new term for many of you, but it stands for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And so that is something that through this comp plan, our hope is to explore that option as an opportunity to look into providing risk assessments for residential properties as well as commercial properties. Just providing more information to residents on, better lighting situations, or, a way to use landscaping as a preventative barrier from break-ins and things like that. So it's an option that we're looking at, and definitely wanted to implement that in Big Goal 3 to see kind of as a pilot program how we can move forward with that and what interest level it gains.
We've, if I could add to that, we've seen some good success when we get a site plan application through the Planning and Zoning Commission. We typically share that with Public Works, the Fire Department, and different entities within the city. A couple of our projects have netted some really good comments from the Police Department about how the layout, the landscaping could be rethought of so that it's not a barrier to things like visibility, or lighting is enhanced so that it's safer for people at nighttime. And so we've scratched the surface with that a little bit, but as Dylan mentioned, there's a lot more within that concept that we would hope to explore in the future through our either development or different programs that the police department can offer our residents.
Any questions on Big Goal 3? Okay. On page 54 is big goal 4. So this focuses on development efforts in ways that result in cost-effective, balanced, compatible, and connected growth. So you'll see on the land use and development where cost-effective growth, balanced growth, compatible growth, and connective and vibrant places, those were all highlighted within big goal 4 and honestly a big priority for our department especially. So with cost-effective growth, it supports a proactive approach to the growth and expansion of the city as a whole. And then balanced growth is fostering the appropriate balance of land uses within a community. And so this is something that kind of ties back to what Mr. Gress was talking about, where the different housing types and what's attainable and what demographic are we trying to capture that we maybe don't already have in the city. Attainable housing is another one. What are we looking for as a city? And then connected and vibrant places, focusing development and redevelopment opportunities along city major nodes and corridors. So one thing you'll see within the plan is really our priority corridor. And so we'll be talking more about activity centers and things of that nature. I made a presentation to both the Planning Commission and the Park Board about a year ago or so, just about activity centers. So we'll get more in depth in that when I get to the land use framework. Any questions?
Well, before you go on, maybe I can ask Nathan, because the park board knows, but I don't know if the people on planning and zoning know that we came up with a new plan for improving our trail system to fund that and do that. I mean, you want to talk about that a little bit, Nathan? Because I think for the connectivity part, that's a big issue, because I think once people see that the new trail system go in, it'll get used a lot more even.
Yeah. So the first portion of the new trail system was redoing our current system. It's been fairly old. It wasn't necessarily built correctly, and so it didn't age as well as we had hoped. And so part of the overall trails plan was to get everything that we currently have in better condition, and something that we don't have to continue to maintain and throw dollars in over the course of several years. So the Park Board and the council approved a maintenance bond for $3.5 million, and that is to take our current trail system and make it brand new, essentially, is what we're doing. That's step one of what I'll talk about later in my chapter of an overall comprehensive trails master plan. That plan doesn't really make any sense if you're spending the next 20 years trying to get everything up to par. So we made the decision to do that immediately so that we have a clean slate when this thing takes off and is adopted. And hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and planning and zoning members may or may not know. I didn't explain it to them, but I know in one of our work sessions, and then it was adopted by the council to move forward with that project.
And if you drive through Recreation Park right now, you'll notice that work has already begun at Recreation Park. A lot of that trail system, as I would say, it's probably about 35–40% complete of a remove and complete repour. The rest of that should be done within the next month, and then they move to Memorial Park. What we chose to do was, we built a lot of trails in the past 10 years as well. So we selected any trails that was designed or constructed in 2018 to now, we left alone, because they're under different standards. We started building trail systems under different standards. If it's 2017 or in the past, we're looking at replacing it, to complete restoration of it, or what areas we can just fix. Some of it has aged well, and we just need to do some minor corrections and crack ceilings, things like that. But the first step of the overall trail system was this particular bond project, and that was to get everything at ground zero so that we can move forward in the next 20 years.
Yeah, thank you.
So as for big goal 5, that's going to be on page 56.
Before you jump into 5 on 4, I know it mentions the kind of housing and stuff we build again. Do we have conversations with developers who develop different types of, call it price points as far as homes go? Because I know quite often we get people that come to P&Z and they talk about affordable homes, and they talk about 350 to 400,000 as their price point. And so I was just curious if we have purposeful conversations with developers who kind of focus or have experience in the affordable housing realm, and not just call it like senior living, but like, you know, because to the points earlier, if we're going to continue to grow, if we're going to attract businesses, those businesses need to have employees who don't make $100,000 a year, and those folks are going to need places to live. So do we have a purposeful plan as far as attracting those types of developers to come to Raymore to help us grow in the way we're looking for? Do we just not care about that, or kind of where we are on that aspect?
Sorry, go ahead.
So we have those conversations quite often, and actually more recently, it's a tough conversation that really these two bodies need to have, because affordable housing is different in the eye of today as it was 30 years ago. Today, if somebody were to bring a home with maybe vinyl siding, would that be something that you all would approve, or is that something where that doesn't meet the quality of Raymore? So there's kind of that broad spectrum of there is affordable housing out there, but we have to make choices that are best for the community, and so that's really up for you guys to make that decision. But it's a very tough discussion that we have before it ever gets in front of Planning Commission or City Council, because we don't want to have a product that goes in front of you that we think is going to be subpar to what the city of Raymore requires and expects.
Yeah, I know that we have regular discussions about, we have people interested, developers interested in Raymore, but we also know the history of the product that they provide, and we have to be very careful and balance what we want. We want something that's meaningful and will last a while and be a quality product for the consumer. So we have to be really careful, because we have had some interesteds that really don't meet what we feel are our standards, and that might raise the price of the home, but it also ensures the value of the community.
No, and I get that aspect, but I know there's organizations, especially throughout the metro, that focus on affordable housing, quality affordable housing, that I think would fit in with the Raymore landscape, that have a more, that have been at it, doing it for a while. Have we reached out and said, hey, we like what you're doing. How do you do, can we recreate that here in Raymore so that we have that quality, but then also affordability? I mean, there's a way to do it. I just didn't know if we've.
Well, we've dipped our toe in that water. I mean, we've got the LIHTC projects, which is low income housing, that's affordable housing. We've got a project ongoing now out in the turn there at Lucy Webb, and we've got another project we're getting ready to turn the first shovel over tomorrow afternoon, back behind the Cumberland building. So that project's ongoing. That was 44 residents. 48 residents, and then you've got the other. I don't know that the project going in behind Freedom Stop is an affordable housing. I think that's market rated townhomes, isn't it?
They are market rate, but they will be on the lower end of the market rate, probably a little on the lower side of what our average rents are here, just due to the lack of the amenity package that they have there. Those are the things that typically drive their rents, is the amenities and the fancy things they put into projects. What I wanted to dovetail on is it's a very difficult thing to do to build affordable housing brand new. We see a lot of developers coming in. The thing nowadays is to make people don't want a big yard, so you shrink the amount of real estate you have to buy to be able to build the house. We've seen that hasn't actually worked out to really be the most affordable home either. What we have noticed, though, is within our overall housing landscape is the single-family homes that are for rent. What we've seen with the addition of the apartment communities we have in Raymore, but also in Belton and surrounding, with the rental rates that are here in Raymore, people are realizing that I can pay a little bit more, and I can have no yard, all the amenities that I need, and I have no responsibility for my unit other than what I'm in. And so we've seen a slight reduction in our single-family properties that are for rent, because evidently people are leaving that behind and moving into something else that's for rent. And so finding ways, and there's some language in the plan about trying to rehabilitate older housing stock and maintain it, because that's where you tend to get, I'll say, the most bang for your buck when you're trying to buy a new house. Sometimes those are older and haven't been maintained, but we've seen a little bit of a shift in single-family for rent housing in our older housing stock in favor of those people leaving that situation and going to something newer, whether it's a townhouse or a duplex or something that's maintenance provided. So within that, you'll see some kind of further on in the plan from a redevelopment standpoint, finding ways to preserve our older housing stock through that lens. We do often have a lot of conversations with developers who are interested in being in Raymore, but as the mayor mentioned, sometimes that comes at a trade-off for quality of the home, the size of the home, the amenities and things like that. But we're always open to having those conversations.
I'm going back to the chicken and the egg again. Basically, we've dealt with the demographics on the housing, but on the commercial side, that's another interest. Are we looking at possibly having developers come in? I know would they have to come to us? We can't necessarily go to them all the time. Of design concept business areas. I won't say shopping centers, that's kind of a bad term at times. But areas where they can have commercial enterprise, not necessarily one whole area, but land that we can set aside or we decide that we should see under commercial development with a concept of it not just being piecemeal, but one whole design.
Yes, to answer your question. So what Mr. Eppert will get into in the land use decision is actually the drawings that you see behind us. We took a good look. In the city, we're fortunate. We don't have a lot of sporadic undeveloped land. We have a few very large tracts of undeveloped land, which is good because it's easy to control the development and approach it from a master plan standpoint. What we have had in the past with developments is the piecemeal development where they chop off the two prime corners for something, and everything else that happens in between is just kind of infill. And so with this plan, we took the approach of what you see behind us is the city's defining what our vision is for it, whether it looks exactly like those drawings or something in between, is basically for any of the properties you see behind us, with the exception of the parks properties necessarily. For any development moving forward, we do want to see a master plan for, okay, you're going to build something on the corner, but it has to mesh and jive with everything else that's going to go on the rest of that. The other reason we took that approach is that, for example, the land around the interchange there's over 200 acres of land or more undeveloped. Raymore can't support 200 acres of commercial development in the future, at least in the time frame of this plan. And so part of that was looking at, okay, this area of that property is really prime for commercial. The area adjacent to that might make sense for some professional office or medical, and this area might make sense for some higher density or lower density residential. And so that is kind of the direction that Dylan will get into on our activity centers. But what you just described of people piecemealing development is, we've experienced some of that in the past, and it's not really good for a city in the long term. So part of that is getting the feedback. Did we get the right vision for those properties? Should we be messing with the balances of commercial versus non-commercial, or are there other uses that we didn't think of as part of that? So to answer your question, yes.
And to let you know, we've had 2 mixed-use projects for the same piece of property that have kind of fallen through because then they wanted to dial it back and piecemeal it, and we weren't willing to do that. We also have a project that's still on the books and is waiting up there between, that'll include a hotel, some commercial, and apartments that's going in between Transwest and Benton House, yeah. Okay. So that one's still on the books, though. But I think he's kind of waiting for this project to get closer to completion before he starts that one. But there are projects that we have considered for mixed use that just, for some reason, haven't really, I mean, they've caught our attention, but they just haven't been able to get it together.
Another example for that is when we get requests from developers to rezone property or approve property, Dylan and I in our office have those conversations. An example I'll bring up recently would be the Oak Ridge Farms neighborhood kind of behind Sonic and the post office. The phase that they're under construction on right now, when they purchased all that land, they wanted to rezone all of that to residential. And part of our support for that is anything that was on 58 Highway. We get that everything behind that probably isn't prime commercial land, and so we kind of entertain the residential development there. But the contingency on that was that everything on 58 remains commercial, which it did. And so we try and strike as much of a balance with that as we can. The mixed-use project you mentioned, the same conversation of how many apartments units to retail square feet to a hotel. We really try and push and pull those numbers until it makes sense for the city.
Okay, anything else? Okay. So big goal 5 is really going to tie back to what we've already discussed, which is kind of that housing ratio again. So we really need direction from both the city council, the park board, planning commission. This is going to set a standard for when we get those conversations, those phone calls that say, hey, we want to come to the city, we can kind of already take a look at our ratios and say, hey, that's something we can support based upon your location, or we're already saturated in our minds for too many apartments or too many duplexes or what have you. But this is really kind of that bring back to we really need direction, and so would love to hear feedback from that while you're thinking about it. Within that big goal 5, we looked at quality housing, neighborhoods, and universal design. Once more, so quality housing. What is it that we decide is quality as opposed to something that maybe is a lesser quality? So vinyl siding, for example. I keep going back to that, but strong neighborhoods. So what are we looking at when it comes to an identity? So maybe it's the monument signs out front of a subdivision. How do you even identify where you're located? I know we've had several people that have called and they're like, I'm not even sure what subdivision I'm in. So another thing is just connected to the police department, which kind of ties back to big goal 3. So safe communities. So they may have an address, but they had no idea what the subdivision was. So just something to kind of think about is that it was actually within Silver Lake, and so but they weren't really sure because it was Silver Lake had several phases and it was back in the 80s, and so they just weren't sure, and so defining that well-defined community and neighborhood.
The HOA, buddy. Yeah, I will.
And then hitting back for universal design. Just everything comes with a cost, and so we want housing to be obtainable for any and all people of any and all ages and abilities. But what does that look like? Because there does come a cost, whether it be grab bars or making hallways wider or zero entry. Those are all come with a cost, and so how do we offset that, or how do we promote that to ensure that it's not just a one-off home, but for the entire community, so an entire subdivision or a percentage of a subdivision?
We know that our staff has been really good about for a quality community to ensure that there are great amenities, whether it's a pool, clubhouse, courts, other dog park, like Mr. Carr is doing for the Parkview subdivision. I do think, though, that page 57 is probably one of the most important pieces of paper in this entire package, because the council struggles literally every day about what percentage is acceptable within our communities, because we hear we're saturated with, on a regular basis with apartments. Stop the apartments projects. Stop it. These guys hear it from electeds as well on a regular basis. But then we hear too, like Mr. Urquilla was mentioning, there has to be a variety of housing for people that want to live in our community. But I do think that there are parameters that we need to think about and establish for the purposes of their guidance moving forward, is what percentages under those 4 categories is our community comfortable with. And it's one we struggle with on a daily basis, especially when somebody brings us a quality project that includes multifamily, like the one I mentioned that's going in off the outer road with quality apartments and commercial and maybe a hotel, and, you know, that, I mean, that's pretty nice coming into the community. But it also includes multifamily, which some people have attached a negative connotation to, because they've seen what other multifamily units of 20 to 30 years have aged into and turned into for other communities. And that we want to be careful of that as we plan our future as well. So I do think that is an important statistic, though, that we need to all get our arms around, as far as what are those percentages and what do we, you know, what are those thresholds. So anyway, I'll stop with that.
I just want to dovetail on that because I think the three of us and others would agree that if there's one thing that comes out of the comprehensive plan, it's a little more direction on where we need to go residentially. And I wanted to bring that up because it has both a financial impact from the budget. From the park board's perspective, with our parkland dedication ordinance, we get a different amount of parkland from a single-family neighborhood than we do two-family neighborhood than we do an apartment complex. And so as you push and pull those numbers, that either means more or less parkland or more or less fee in lieu for the park board to fund projects with. It means a lot for building construction activity and inspection activity for staff. And so moving forward, I appreciate what you pointed out, because that is, we get a lot of interest from developers, being the community that we are. And sometimes it's tough to have to say no. It's good when we can say yes the times that we have. But just setting those metrics that staff needs to be looking at so we can have the conversations that we need to have when those developers approach us, I think is really important.
To that point, I mean, I assume, and it's an assumption on my part, the park board has, like, based off of the land available, based off of what you just mentioned as far as what percentage gets either dedicated to the park or fee in lieu, do we basically have a strategy on how much more land we want as park versus how much more we'd prefer to have as fee in lieu?
So I'll speak to the ordinance, and I'll let Mr. Mustine or the park board chime in on that as well. There is a standard of 20 acres per 1,000 people. So that's what's in our ordinance, and that's what we require based on the number of units in a subdivision. As part of this plan, we did look at kind of where we are based on the residents that we have, and we're not quite caught up to that standard yet. But we've put a lot more emphasis recently on, the city has purchased a lot of parkland recently with respect to Hawk Ridge and doing the improvements there. And so through development, it's the last couple of projects, the fee in lieu has been the priority for the park board to be able to develop those parks. I would expect as that park gets developed and finished, Nate has a lot of good vision for the Good Wrench Park that we've had dedicated to us. So from our perspective, we really haven't had to, with the exception of Hawk Ridge, haven't had to purchase a lot of parkland. We've acquired it through development, and it's been through the fee in lieu that we've funded those. But in terms of the vision, I'll let Mr. Mustine at the park board chime in on how they envision that going forward.
The ratio that he said is the number one thing that we look at, is are we nationally on par with what the National Recreation and Parks Association recommend for us. Locally, what we do is we literally look at a map of where our parks are and say, do we need one here? What is the purpose of having a park that's 10 acres right next to an 80-acre park? Does it serve a purpose, what we can do with that? And those are internal discussions with the park board of, this doesn't make any sense, let's take the fee in lieu and invest that into some other area. And then there are other parts of towns where we're like, as soon as something comes open, we're taking that property and we're going to dictate what we're going to do with that. So a lot of it is based on need and location, more so than what's being offered, you know. And a great example is the Parkside property that's we intend to use for a dog park. That was a mix. We didn't take the full acreage that we could have required. We took what we thought was a good use of that property, and then the rest in fee and lieu so that we can invest it into that property. So that's been a trend that our park board has allowed the staff to move forward with recently. But we do have some parks that have been designated for dedication that are coming online, and within our park chapter, it does talk a lot about what we want to do with that. But any time a development comes on, you know, we're we're talking to them right up front to see what they have in mind. And sometimes there's properties that just don't make sense, and we immediately, there's discussions that we're just gonna take the money and invest it in other properties that we have.
Thank you.
I want to also give, just on the notion of our ordinance and how we handle parkland, I want to give credit to Nate and his park board on that. In the past 4 months, we've had, I think, 3 different conversations with cities who have reached out to ask us about how we implement it because of the way that we do it. So as I mentioned, we're not quite up to the 20 acres per thousand, but we have some very nice parks that we've invested in. And so while the park board is here, that's a conversation that Nate and I have had separately and together with cities who have reached out about how we obtain our parkland, how we fund it.
We're very aggressive regionally in terms of how parkland is dedicated, the fee and lieu formulas. We're at the upper level of what cities do, and we're having communities such as Lee Summit and
Kansas City.
Yeah, Kansas City called us as well, wanting to mimic how our ordinances read so that they can, take advantage of the same type of things we do.
No, I appreciate that, because I know when we get presentations, you guys mention the land that's either was supposed to be for a park or that we took fee in lieu, and it just helps to know that you guys are cognizant of that, and that you're talking about that before it gets to us, so that when you're presenting to us, we know that the park's already given their opinion on that, because I know that's a big piece of some of the projects we look at is, yeah, we're going to take some for park and then fee in lieu or just fee in lieu. So it's helpful to know you guys are on your game. Appreciate it.
The mayor was talking about the multifamily stuff and how there's like mixed feelings about that. And I wondered if the developers that come in with this idea to like take a block or whatever and put together a plan for how to, that's going to include multifamily, if they would entertain the idea of not just building and flipping that to selling it, but holding it for 20 years or something, maintaining the properties, maintaining the landscaping, and if we could work out some type of agreement where they hold it for 20, 25 years, and then if they wanted to sell out, they could, but by then they've maybe put a new roof on it, or they've kept it up for that long, that might make the residents feel a little bit better about, in 15 years, this isn't going to look like an eyesore for everybody.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to draw attention and I guess dovetail to not a separate section of the plan, but a lot of our apartment projects recently have gone through a Chapter 100 process, which is an incentive the city can offer to help fund a project. And while we do get some pushback on the use of those tools, the great thing that we're able to do with that, the development agreement that the city has to put together to even use that tool or offer it to a developer is very restrictive. And so we basically tell the developer, here's what our expectations are if we're going to use the tool. And not, for example, the Manor Homes at Eagle Glen they were not a Chapter 100 project, so they were free to do as they pleased after they were approved there, but they've been maintained very well with the couple times it's been sold. But our other projects here with the depot and the lofts, those were ones where the city outlined what our expectations are. We have the approval of whether or not they can sell that property to somebody else for the 23 years that it's in place. With respect to the maintenance of it, if there are issues that we see, we have the ability to, we can send anybody a violation for property maintenance. But within those agreements, we have a lot more leverage on how that property is maintained and operated than you would as if it was just a standalone market rate project. So there's pros and cons to each of those, but I just wanted to point out with our development agreements, that's one thing that we've gotten very particular on, that the city manager and the council have gotten very particular on with. If we're going to build an apartment community, it's going to be one of high quality, and it's going to be one where these are the rules that we expect you to follow. Otherwise, the city has the ability to void that deal, and they, goes back on the tax rolls in the process there. So I don't know, there's not necessarily one answer to your question, but at least wanted to provide that perspective for.
Yeah, it sounds like you've really already thought about this quite a bit, and for all intents and purposes, kind of already got a cohesive plan together for it, so good.
And you've done the same with the townhomes, and like the townhomes that were built just behind Mazuma, by Mazuma, they had to hang on to the ownership of that for a certain period of time too, correct? Or not?
So that one, it wasn't Chapter 100, but since it was a PUD, that's another tool in our zoning ordinance that allows us to deviate from what their standard zoning code is. And so we can do additional stipulations like how the lots are split up, whether it's one large lot or 4 individual. So yes, that's another tool that we have there as well.
Yeah,
So,
'cause- yeah, go ahead.
I really like the 80-20 that you guys have been talking about, keeping that split, right? But something was a little bit perplexing when I was reading over this. On page 57, towards the bottom there, you say, with respect to other residential development, trends in demand are likely to reduce the need for two-family and multifamily, 4+ dwellings in favor of large-scale, full-service apartment communities. So is that what's trending, full-scale, large apartment communities over residential? Or is it just over the two-family and multifamily?
That was written with respect to duplexes and above, I guess I should say. So not, take out the detached single-family part of that equation. That was the market analysis that our consultant did that basically said Raymore is not likely to experience a lot more townhome and duplex growth. We're likely to experience more interest in apartment communities. And part of that dovetails back into, that's just what the market is saying. The council and our boards and commissions can always direct us to focus on other things and try and get those good quality developments here.
But that would tilt us away from 80-20, more towards 70-30, correct?
Correct. That's the downside, I'll say the downside of apartments. It's very quick to add 300 units in an apartment. It takes a little bit while to catch up with 300 detached single-family homes.
Yeah.
And so those are, as we make the decisions, we can, we approve one apartment complex and we work to build the inventory of single-family. So all that is kind of baked into what we mentioned. If there's one directive that comes out of the plan, it's how do we attack the housing growth? Because we're obviously poised to get a lot of housing growth.
Well, I'm going to probably speak for most people, what you've heard and what you probably have gotten calls about in terms of, I like the 80-20 more than the 70-30, right? I mean, I think that's the general consensus, so. The other thing I wanted to say is that, with respect to some other things that were said, it's not so much that, I'm a person or people that I talk to in my ward are people that we don't want to see multifamily. We don't want. The thing is, it's the upkeep, it's the quality, it's the standards that we set and that they're met, and the owners are held responsible to it. I think that's the biggest thing. So it's not so much that I'm against multifamily or anything like that. It's just that if we do it, let's make sure we have the administrative staff to make sure we are able to handle the administrative portions of it.
And I think a big directive and goal of how we were approaching the activity centers here behind us is that if we're going to build more apartments over the next 20 years, where should we put those? Clustering those next to our major thoroughfares or commercial centers is a lot wiser than plopping that in the middle of an established subdivision. And so that's one of the goals is if we approach with those and the council is supportive of that and our boards and commissions, we want to be able to tell those developers, well, we can't really support that here, but if you're really interested in Raymore, there's 40 acres over here by Sam's Club, for example, that we feel would be a better option. Because we've kind of already developed the areas in the city where we've had infill zoning that was duplexes and fourplexes. Right now, there's no land available that is zoned for that type of development or apartments. So anything else coming forward that hasn't already been approved has to go back through the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Park Board, or the City Council. And so that's why we're in a very good position, I think, to make those decisions because there's no other land available right now where they can do that without that approval. But that was really the point, I think, of the discussion with the activity centers is if we build the multifamily, if that's something that we see over the next 20 years, we think those are the areas where it makes the most sense because of the proximity to the highway or Fox Ridge Drive that gets you out of the city and so forth. But again, part of that is, did we get that right? Should we not be looking at those areas or should we just not focus on apartments over the next 20, 25 years? So hopefully that kind of gives a little flavor to your question.
Can I add to this that unfortunately or fortunately, housing's different than it was 5 years ago. I mean, it's nothing for somebody to pay $2,700 for rent now, which changes that perspective of what they're renting, the amenities we've talked about and so forth. When a lot of us think of multifamily housing, we're thinking of 200 apartments that are trash. And people are coming in and out. You see the housing now, you see the new complexes, and they're just as nice as houses. And if you look at the younger people, they want to travel, they want to do other stuff, they don't want to have kids till their 30s now. So whether we like it or not, that's probably going to be the move forward. But the good news is what they're building sustains better, sustains better clientele in there that help make it not look so bad. I think the other thing that we have to think about is, as we talk into the commercial part, we've always talked about foot traffic. All these businesses want foot traffic. Well, with the nicer apartments, we pick up much quicker foot traffic than we are when housing is $200 a square foot to build it new plus, and interest rates are in the 7s. And how long that's going to last, don't know, but it seems like it's going to last for a while. So for us to be able to push some of these businesses to come in here, we've got to show them foot traffic and nicer multifamily, more apartments, the nicer duplexes, and that stuff will help double those numbers, triple them a lot quicker as well.
And along that trend, I noticed in Kansas City, and I don't know how much time you spend up in there, that a lot of the buildings that they're remodeling or refurbishing, they're putting in commercial space on the main floor, and then the higher levels are those super nice apartments, hell, with pools on the rooftop or whatever the case might be. And so, yeah, I mean, the face of multifamily is completely drastically different than it was, to his point, even just 5 years ago, as far as what's being created and built. And again, the attractiveness of the millennial, zennial, whatever they're called now, of wanting, a condo with everything paid for, a little dog park on the first floor, in the backyard or whatever for their dog that they have. That's kind of the new norm. And they want to be able to have a place that they can go and do that. And I think that aspect of multifamily and what you're talking about and looking at, I think is a perfect kind of fit to kind of attract that.
It's called the village concept. That's, a lot of those are established in large metropolitan areas where they have self-contained communities.
To the point about the upkeep, I just wanted to touch on that. Just from an enforcement standpoint on the maintenance, the 80-20 kind of renter owner occupied scenario, in terms of the manpower it takes to kind of enforce our ordinances. If you have a 300 unit apartment complex on one parcel and you have 300 single family homes scattered throughout our different subdivisions, it's very difficult, and we've had a couple of conversations with the council about programs we could put in place. But it takes a lot of manpower to enforce the property maintenance code on 300 single family homes or duplexes scattered throughout the community versus one ownership company who maintains those 300 units on one parcel. And so that's the one thing we've been wrestling with, is the kind of a rental registration program, which is a goal you'll find in the plan, of how does the city start to attack the aspect of the sporadic nature of those units that are in that 30% renter occupied. Some cities have done very well. Some cities have created that and realized it's very difficult to enforce. But that's kind of a misnomer that we get, is that it's actually a lot more challenging for us to enforce our codes on renter-occupied units with the out-of-state landlords and the sporadic nature of that versus 300 units that have one address, one owner, one person we have to send a letter to. But I think all of the things that were just brought up were, as I mentioned, the exact things we're hoping to get the direction on. The qualms that the community has on multifamily, if we're going to support that, how can we best address those moving forward? Either it's the location of it, the maintenance of it, the look of it, the affordability of it. Those are all things we hope to kind of accomplish by the time this is hopefully adopted in the next couple of months.
Well, like any good marketing department, we just have to call it something different, even though it's the same thing. So, yeah.
Out of pure curiosity, with the new apartments that have been built and some of those townhomes, how have they filled up? Are they filling up quickly? Are people coming in?
So with respect to, I'll do it on a kind of case-by-case basis. I know the manor homes there, they have been stabilized ever since I've worked here, meaning there's always a handful of units that are vacant. Where is that? The manor homes of Eagle Glen, so right there at Fox Ridge. And so that is a very stabilized. All of our occupancy in terms of commercial and residential is very healthy. With respect to the Depot, which is the newest apartment complex south of Sam's Club, they are still in the ramp-up period. They've got one building left to turn over from construction, but they've seen very good leasing activity already with people moving there. And I know with respect to the most recent duplexes we've seen, because they're all kind of focused in one area, I know the wait list for those are very long. And that doesn't mean that we're not seeing good interest in new single-family construction either. But I know that's another misnomer, is that all these units might be vacant. We're seeing very good absorption of the units that we're building. And as I mentioned, we're at a point now where we don't really have anything left to be built. It all has to go back through the approval and review process, which is why the next step of this project we think is pretty critical.
If people don't think they're building single-family, drive through Creekmore, you'll see plenty of building going on.
And as I mentioned earlier, it's easier to see all the multifamily construction because it's along Dean Avenue, it's along Fox Ridge. You know, if you don't live in Creekmore, you're probably not driving through the neighborhood. If you don't live in Eagle Glen, you probably didn't see all the homes that were constructed there over the last 10 years. So it goes back to that sporadic nature. We're seeing a lot of single-family growth. It's just not concentrated on one area that everybody can see when they're coming in and out of town.
On single-family homes, real quick, do we have a plan or strategy for homes? Because I know we have neighborhoods where the residents are elderly, and either they stop maintaining their home and no one comes in to help, and then the home kind of gets dilapidated. Do we have any type of plan in place to kind of maybe incentivize those homeowners to, you know, try to help with improvements to keep their house maintained so that when they do eventually, I had to say it this way, when they do eventually pass away, that the house isn't in such bad shape that, like on the corner of was it Sunset and Buena Vista, that's now just got boards in the windows and doors.
So two things with respect to that. Most cities do have programs that deal with property maintenance grants or funds that the cities receive through what's called community development block grants. Raymore is not a city that's an entitlement community, so we don't receive those funds, and that's how most cities operate a program like that. However, through our code enforcement department, although he's a department of one, very familiar with the house that you're bringing up. Two things there. We try to be lenient in the cases where it is an elderly resident who has property violations that we just know they can't fix. Every now and then we get outreaches from churches or community groups that are looking to give back, or the Day of Giving, or whatever their organization calls it. So we save those instances for cases like that, where there's people that can come cut their grass real quick, or fix a cabinet, or whatever they might need done. What we struggle with, though, would be the case of the house that you just brought up, where it's kind of an interpretation of our code and the things that we enforce. There are property violations out there, but in some cases, we do have to be reasonable with the time frame to get those things done. So it's always a balance of how quickly can we address it. We want it done the right way, so we certainly don't want somebody to slap an improvement on and say that they're done. But through our code enforcement division and kind of that property registration thing I mentioned, that's kind of our plan to maybe try and attack some of that. We also have, kind of in the weeds, but for property maintenance violations, we now have a special prosecuting attorney who handles things very quickly, that has helped get a lot of our cases closed in our code enforcement division. So to answer your question, we do have aspects of a plan that we kind of work on to look at that.
And so,
Go ahead.
you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So I've been out here since 2005. I've been out here about 19 years, right? So most of what I've seen out here, and this is just a general observation, especially if we're talking about moving from that 80-20 to perhaps a 75-25 split, 70-30 in the next 15, 20 years. I've done a lot of work, shopping over in, say, like, I'm just going to give a Overland Park area. One of the things that I've noticed that's a little bit different is that, and which I really like about Overland Park area, at least certain parts of Overland Park, South Leawood, Prairie Village area, is that they have apartments, but you just don't see them. They're not very visible. And so as we move into maybe a split of 75-25, 70-30, and you know, with the changing of the millennial, zennial, whatever you call them, as that becomes more of a thing, and people are more into apartments as opposed to apartment living as opposed to single families, it just may be worth addressing or looking at what is our, what does the code say about the barriers and the things that maybe you may have some apartments, but maybe they don't have to be so out there. And maybe we need to I'm just throwing it out as an idea, just something to think about as we move into that area. That maybe there's a way that we could revamp some of the other ordinances and codes and so forth, so that, yeah, we have a lot of apartments, but hey, we also have some mature trees and things like that that maybe can not make them stand out. I'm just throwing it out there.
I'll give one example, and it's only because I go there every morning for daycare. But Foxwood Springs is actually one of the communities that has a good percentage of our apartment units in it. And it's kind of a community of its own there, but you drive down 58 and it's a mix of the duplexes and the villas, and they have some single-family patio homes there, but they have a good chunk of apartments, and they're the core of that kind of community. And so it's kind of the location and kind of what you put around the apartment. It's a struggle of some residents not wanting an apartment in the middle of their neighborhood, and then maybe not wanting it right on the thoroughfare too. So I think that boils down to the architecture of what it is, the landscaping and the buffering and the screening, and just the number of apartments within a community is something we can look at.
You can barely notice some, Foxwood. If you're not paying attention, you're driving down 58, you don't really see it.
Right.
And they do a lot of that in other parts of the metropolitan area that I think allows some buffering of the apartments that are there. Just something to think about.
If I may, one of the dilemmas that I think I always have with multifamily, high-density multifamily is, and Mr. Gress, I know you addressed it earlier, if you put high-density housing in the middle of an area that's surrounded by single-family residential, then to me, that's the worst situation, because now all those people have to go in and out through the existing neighborhood. The dilemma is that if you put the high-density multifamily close to the thoroughfares, which in my opinion makes a lot more sense in the long run, but now the folks in the low-density single-family are driving through to get in and out to the thoroughfares. So it's really something, it's hard to please everybody all of the time. And maybe, I hate to say it, just go with the lesser of two evils, but I think where we are locating the apartment communities these days makes really, really good sense. And frankly, from my vantage point, and I guess having lived in Raymore city limits over 30 years now, I see the buildings, but the apartment communities are really almost invisible, like I think you said as well. The visibility is the traffic on 58. And, I go back to the time when 58 Highway was two-lane, no shoulders. Obviously, it's considerably different now, and of course, it had no stoplights. 58 Highway is one of the most obvious things that has changed over the past 30 years. And frankly, for having been on Planning and Zoning Commission for a long time, it's probably ironic. Every time I'm trying to turn out onto 58, I'm like, tell me again, why do we want to keep growing Raymore? But it's going to grow anyway.
Yeah, where's the 58 streetcar in this?
Yeah, I don't know, but the apartment communities, for my vantage point, would be very much invisible, except for the increased traffic. The other thing, and I'm sure that I'm jumping out of sequence, but one of the things in this comprehensive plan that really struck me, I think it's back in the appendix, probably in Appendix B, but it's talking about the community conversations, et cetera, and the age brackets that turned out for the community conversations. And there are several things in this document that actually shocked me. And that was one of them, that it was mostly people over age 60. And so, you know, it's obviously not a given that the apartment communities are going to be full of younger people. Foxwood Springs obviously is not. And hopefully the apartment communities are a good diverse mix as well. But if the apartment communities attract younger people and so forth, one of the biggest challenges I think the city of Raymore has is getting that younger set involved in the growth of Raymore.
Well, and I think to that point, it goes to the mayor's earlier point of trying a different approach of getting feedback from the community. Because I know, like in P&Z, you guys always talk about how the notice was put out in the paper. I don't know anyone younger than me who reads a paper. You know, so we talk about wanting to make sure that we're reaching the community so that they're aware, and that's been the way we do it. But to his point, if all we're getting are the people who still read papers, then we're not doing a good enough job, I think, letting people know what's going on. Because if there's one thing I've learned about the younger crowd is they're willing to get involved, they just don't know what's going on because they don't open a paper.
Right, and I agree with that. Thank heavens for the orange signs. That was something that was long overdue. And Mr. Grass, I guess maybe that might have been before your time or when you first started working here, but you know, we definitely have so many ways of communicating these days. We need to use them all to get the word to the people that should be involved.
I'll give credit to the communications department. I think the issue we have is that we do so much that people don't know that what we do in terms of communication. Because we do, I mean, with respect to the notices for projects, we're statutorily required to go to a newspaper. We put that in the weekly report. It goes on our current projects map that I'll touch on here after this topic. So that I think the point is we need to find the way of what would you like us to do? Why aren't we getting that participation in the process? The same goes with the boards and commissions. We miss a lot of demographic because we don't have a high school student on maybe the board or commission that we're working with, or a task force or something, to try and get that involvement up. But I think that's a big question of what aren't we doing, because we're doing a lot in terms of communication, I would say. But very good point.
Would anyone have any heartburn if we went a little bit further in the plan? Perfect. Okay. I didn't think so. I just wanted to be upfront. So we're going to skip to page 83. This will actually be the land use and development framework. So if you all remember back, I've kind of already referenced it. About a year ago, I went to each of your boards to present on our future land use map. There were several cleanup items that were either the property isn't being used that way anymore or is needed to just be updated through rezonings or different applications that have happened on that property since really 2013. Very minor changes were made. You will notice that there is an activity center that's been added to the use table or the designated uses, as well as rural density residential. And that is essentially going to be kind of our northern portion of the city where it abuts County Line Road or 150. And then a little bit further south, like to essentially Gore, or a little bit further south than that. Those are all areas that do not have the ability to be to have sanitary sewer. And so those are all going to be identified as something where if any development that comes forward, which the most recent development would be Creekside Ranch, all of those are large lot, single family development for a subdivision, but it all is going to be serviced by a sanitary, a private sanitary sewer system. So it's going to be septic. So that was one thing that we wanted to really add to this plan, and actually that it generates a different conversation for us as we talk about the intent to annex plan. It used to be that we were going to annex all the way down south, closer to Peculiar to about 203rd Street. And there's so much development in there that are just large acreage lots that there's not going to be a benefit to the city. And so you will notice that southern portion is going to be left off at that point. But didn't know if you had any specific questions on the future land use map since I've made the presentation. Okay. Another item that I wanted to mention was the public uses. So before, and really even still in our code today, a school can go in any zoning designation, but we wanted to clean that up to where it was essentially a public zoning. We see that as more of another entity that's very similar to the city or to the fire department, and so wanted to update that to where every school is now going to show as a public zoning use as opposed to it could be agriculture or R1. So just kind of a cleanup item on that. Moving on to activity centers. So you're going to see everything behind us here and also within your packet there. The first activity center is going to be a municipal circle, which I guess let me back up a little bit. An activity center is going to be a site that can support a variety of uses that may not fit in any one single zoning designation. And so you're typically going to see kind of what we've already talked about, where there's a mix of uses, residential, commercial, maybe some entertainment uses, or really kind of all the above. So you've got commercial on the main level, and then apartments that kind of are above that, a number of stories. So that's what we call mixed use. Within the municipal circle, which is where we're at now, you're going to see a concept plan that really just shows a couple of lots that are left for development. We already have an overlay district for municipal circle that gives design standards, the uses that are allowed. The only new thing that you'll see that was not there prior is HTO, as that is the newest addition to our commercial portfolio. Any questions on municipal circle?
If I could dovetail on kind of the concepts that Dylan's outlining, the intent again behind the activity centers is that the city is going to define what the uses are that are there, the mixture of uses, the general layout of what is there versus letting a developer come in and take the prime corner. And so everything he's describing within these different centers is the vision that staff has put together for you all and the council to decide, is that the actual vision that we want for that area? And I'm glad Dylan started the municipal circle. The initial vision for municipal circle was supposed to be kind of a retail downtown business complex. With the development along 58 kind of after the fact, there's not a lot of visibility here, so it's just not a prime area for commercial development. So what you'll see in the package in front of you is that it actually makes more sense to pivot to kind of a governmental center. So with City Hall, and the fire department just recently expanded their operations over there, Centerview with the Parks Department. We've got a couple good thoughts on the land that the city owns right next door here. And so we're kind of changing what was once the vision for, again, a kind of a civic hub or a commercial hub, and is now morphed into more of a civic center from those types of uses, because there's other properties here that Dylan's describing that are much better for kind of a retail center or a commercial downtown. And so at any point, like I said, the intent of this is our thoughts of what the vision could be. If we've missed anything or we're a little bit off, we definitely want to know so we can go back and kind of clean those up a little bit. That's the last plan we'll talk about after the fact here.
Yeah, that's why we acquired some of the land from the Monheisers. Yeah. We want that to be the entryway to the new sports complex. So talking about the governmental center, I know that we talked to Cass County Library within the last year. Now, they've had a change of leadership, but from a governmental perspective, I don't know if you guys have ever visited the Olathe Public Library, but it's phenomenal. I mean, it's got meeting rooms, it's got other amenities other than just reading material. You can embroider in there, you can print out large stock photos. I mean, there are all kinds of amenities that this library has, and I'd love to see something like that come to our community. Now, talking to Cass County, it's difficult for them to get their heads around those types of technology changes, because I've offered to take them over there by the hand and show them the Olathe Public Library. But is that a governmental thing that we can push for in partnership with the Cass County Library, or is that something? Because I know at one point they were asking us to donate the land. I don't know that that was our intent, but do you know where that project is at?
So with respect to the library, that project is very much on hold due to the change in leadership. The previous director there was very interested in striking up a partnership with the city. The benefit of our land over here is that we own it, and so whether the council chooses to donate it if it's a good enough project, or checks boxes that they want to move the needle on, or some other agreement that we have to make that land available. The same goes for, we purchased land for the Justice Center, and that's a big piece of land over there, kind of on the S-curve. There's probably an opportunity there to look for some sort of partnership. So that's kind of, there's some language in the plan about our economic development efforts and how we seek out those partnerships. We had a lot of good conversations with the library about those two properties, and they were very interested, but due to the change in leadership there, it's kind of been put on hold. We have a couple other projects that are interested in locating there from a kind of a workforce development, maybe training center or something along those lines. But the benefit there is that the city owns that land, and so again, we control the vision for what we do with that. And the council makes the decisions on, do we want to donate it? What does that partnership look like? But that use is very much along the line with what you'll see in the Vision Free Municipal Circle.
Are there any university or collegiate arms that have been interested in putting in a?
Back in
Not a lot of land there, but
back in 2016, when I first started, the city was in conversations. The economic development director at the time with Park University about a satellite office. We've had conversations with MCC to an extent about a satellite office here. It's just about it's finding the right group to do the right thing in kind of in layman's terms.
But those are the types of things we're talking about when you talk about it being a governmental hub.
Right.
We're talking about those kinds of entities, not a commercial
Correct.
Development. Though.
Yep.
Okay.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Since we're talking about that, has there been any talk about, one of the things that's always kind of, I don't want to say trouble, that might be too strong of a word, but about Raymore is that there's never really been a downtown Raymore, right? I'm sure you've had these conversations before. Has there been any talk, because as I look at the map here in general, we look at commercial, we look at all and it's like, okay, we got some stuff over there by Casey's, down there, way down there. Then we got the Freedom Stop. Then we got some stuff that it looks like it's commercial, it's commercial right along 58. But has there been any talk of a downtown, a centralized downtown spot? And if so, has that revolved around this, where we're sitting right now?
So you actually just pivoted right into my next comment. So it's actually going to be the next site that we're talking about, which is Foxwood Village. So that's 40 acres just south of Willow Wind and really north of the Lofts. And I guess it would be, yeah, so west of CVS and east of Culver's.
Yep.
So as Municipal Circle has kind of, I guess, went from a vision from a downtown area to a civic hub, this was kind of our next thought would be for Foxwood Village to be a downtown type area. We have had a number of, I guess, discussions with developers that have had interest in the property. To this point, we have not been able to have a successful agreement. And I'd really pass it to Mr. Gress on more discussions with that. But ideally, this would have a commercial kind of along that 58 corridor, and then it would either be apartments or a mixture of housing types kind of to the south, like we were talking about, where you don't necessarily see the housing because you're going to see commercial as you go along 58. But that was really the impetus for that, is where there would be a street that just goes directly through it and would actually connect Fox Ridge to Mott Drive. And so there would be a singular street that would connect everyone, very pedestrian friendly, lots of amenities, and a lot of good commercial users.
How much acreage is that about?
40.
40. Okay.
if you, to kind of back up, really the impetus for creating the designation of activity centers, if you look at the intro to that, I'm not sure, I think it starts on page 90, was due to the fact that residents have always said we need a downtown and we don't have one. So it really, in any sense, we approach the activity centers from either a new development standpoint, how do you create a new downtown or a city center? I'll give a comparable example, the Lenexa City Center. That was a project that they held out for the vision that they wanted, and it has paid off dividends for them. They did not deviate from that plan really one bit.
87th and 435, right?
Yes.
That looks nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm jealous. You work over there.
That's a good looking spot.
But that's a prime example of how you created a new downtown from something that was a vacant field. So that's kind of the vision of what you'll see in the Fox Ridge Village, the Good Ranch there around the interchange. Those are all examples of how you can create.
You're gonna need more than 40 acres for that.
Right, correct. On the flip side of that, though, we've also looked at it from a redevelopment standpoint. What you'll see on the Central 58 corridor, which is that map over there. So that area is unique. Basically, we approach it that you can create it or you can redevelop it. You can approach it either way. The benefit of that side of town is that with 58 highway going through it, you have a good spine of a kind of a transportation network. You also have a lot of older buildings, which was what kind of makes a downtown a downtown. So a couple years ago, we did have a good presentation with the council about a redevelopment plan for that area. We wanted to finish this project first to kind of set the vision. We envision if this gets approved as a comprehensive plan, the next step is to kind of do what we would call an area plan for that specific area. Maybe a zoning overlay to kind of dictate what uses we want to see over there. The preservation of some of the older buildings that are over there. And just how do you recreate that from a lens of redevelopment versus building it from the ground up on another property? So, but to your point, the whole reason we approached that activity center kind of concept was because residents have said forever, we want a downtown and we don't have one. So this was our approach at, here's some options on where you could push that development.
Central 58? No, I don't like that as a downtown area.
I actually kind of like it though, because our intent is to build a criminal justice center with their courts and emergency management and that large yellow box in the upper right-hand corner of that.
Really?
And so if you have a governmental anchor like that.
Like a courthouse.
In an area that's ripe for redevelopment, around some new amenities there, because you've got a mixed use of single family and multifamily in the Oak Ridge Farms project. And there are vacant lots and older areas of industrial area there south of Oak Ridge Farms that needs some loving. And I think that area there is a potential hub for a city center, if not the pork chop.
And I think the good thing is it's really not an either or situation for us.
It's in the pork chop.
The big blue spot.
Be the
North
land on the
Gas.
north side of the North Gas
There
interchange
were
there.
actually some elected, this Good Ranch mixed-use village, there were elected officials previous, and it was probably about the time Jerry came on planning and zoning, when they were talking about the North Gas Parkway area, they were talking about that area as a potential city center area in that general vicinity, because there was so much open acreage there that you could design. And it looks like you've kind of, with the Good Ranch over there, you've kind of done a little bit of that, but maybe less parking and more buildings. But I think that's another area that's, I don't know that 58 at Fox Ridge is gonna get there. But I do think those other two have opportunities for
Well, and
hubs.
And when I think of a downtown area, like just Belton, for instance, where they have Main Street, I think of an area where I can park and hop out and walk down the area with my kids. And I think if you're going to do the S-curve on 58, you have to have, whether it's like a road just to the east or something, but it can't be 58 itself because it's just too much traffic for me to ever be like, hey, let's go downtown and hop out with my kids and hey, stay off 58 because you're going to get killed. but I think there's potential there. I just think you'd have to be like the little roads off to the west, the west side of 58. I think that, you could do that, but they're not connected to like be able to park and walk and that kind of a thing.
Well, and I'm also privy to the plan they previously proposed, which meant a reconfiguration of the actual pavement there
Yeah.
as well, not just building on either side of it. There was some.
Quit teasing me, Mayor. Where's this?
I know,
You
right?
you say you want 58, and I don't disagree with you, but give me the details, man.
Well, the thing is too, if you do something like that, architecturally, you want something other than looking at the same buildings you see everywhere.
And I agree, and I think that's why each of these, as you read through the narrative of each of these locations, they each have different things that are better than the other one for different purposes. So, for example, the walkability, 58 Highway isn't super walkable right now, but it could be in the future with modifications to it. With the Good Ranch and that plan, we tried to keep the traffic areas kind of focused with the roundabouts and make it walkable. And you'll see some of that when we get into the transportation framework of how that relates to the land use. But that's the point is right now 58 isn't walkable, but if that's the vision for the city, then we can certainly start making it so. But I just want to point out, from our standpoint, it's not like we're not here to decide that the Good Ranch is going to be the city center. It's just, if it's going to develop, these are the things we want it to incorporate because that's what it creates. So hopefully we kind of hit the mark with that. I agree with you. There's a lot of parking to make that a downtown. Probably got to throw in a few parking garages or something.
Yeah.
But the mixture of uses is what we were kind of, how do those all go together? Where does the multifamily go if that's what you're going to have there? How does that separate from the retail? Should it be more integrated? But each of those sites is kind of unique in its own way, and that's kind of what we were trying to.
The other thing is that when you're talking about creating a potential downtown somewhere, you're talking about really extremely large projects, huge. And so maybe bigger than the S curve, or that inverted S curve, whatever that is. Maybe it's such a large thing, right? So it would take a lot of planning. It would take a whole revamping. If it is 58, if it is the S curve, it would take a whole revamping of everything. So
I thought you said you've been to Overland Park.
I have.
Downtown area's not that big.
no, but like Lenexa, when I look at downtown, I think of what he said in terms of walkability, kind of like downtown Lenexa, the Lenexa corridor, whatever they call it. And that's beyond the vision of, I think, what we're thinking about right now.
And I think, as we mentioned originally, the comp plan is 10,000 feet view. Where we would envision going next with this is getting direction from the boards and commissions and the council of what area do you want us to focus on with an area plan or a zoning overlay district or something that we establish more guidelines than what this project necessarily had the scope of. And so we've kind of gotten the direction from the council on the S-curve a little bit after we wrap this up. But I think that's the direction we're seeking, is after we kind of set the tone for those properties, what tools does the city have to implement that, whether it's a master plan like Lenexa City Center had, new zoning tools within our ordinance, or any combination. But like I said, this was all meant to be pretty high level and the different concepts that make a downtown a downtown. So it's all really good feedback that you guys are providing tonight.
As the city grows, how do we keep the wards evenly dispersed? Did we hit a certain threshold and there's a fifth ward at some point, or I don't know from a city council's perspective how that kind of thing could work.
So a lot of that gets dealt with the census. And so every 10 years, they do a count of people. And so that gets redrawn, just like redistricting for, your higher level House of Representatives and Senate. Same for here. If we have an exponential amount of growth, that could trigger a Ward 5 at some point. But I know recently it's just kind of changed a boundary line here or there, so.
Yeah, but I don't know if the number of wards is a charter requirement. But as Dylan mentioned, we just redistricted in 2020, and we really only had one minor change in one of the wards. But we do look at that every 10 years, I guess, with the census. And we just, as a caveat, and I can send some information to the park board, we did just get the updated census numbers for 2023 that had some good growth for the city. So I can follow up tonight or tomorrow with some information to the park board on what what Raymore experienced in the last, between 2020 and 2023 so far, as it relates to what we just talked about.
The last thing I really want to kind of highlight within the framework for the land use is we've talked really about undeveloped land for the most part. Now we're kind of changing gears a little bit and going into strategic investment and reinvestment. So the areas that we've highlighted are going to be with the Willow Wind Shopping Center and as well as the S-curve. So those two areas are what we've considered for either an area plan or looking at some type of incentive or a mixture of the two, to kind of pull on some different levers to see what could trigger some or spur some growth or development in those areas. Those are definitely two older shopping centers in the area, and so wanted to the hard part that we're going to have is just getting with the property owners and getting them on board and kind of talking with them on what they would envision as well as the city. So it's going to be a big partnership between us and the property owners. The S-curve. So yes, yep, that's correct.
Page 97.
You got more people, well, that's one of the things I was gonna mention, you got more people to deal with if you're talking about the S-curve, because you got more businesses, et cetera, right?
Correct.
Whereas you're talking about the Willow Wind area, you got, so cost effectiveness would be Willow Wind.
Except he's not very,
Well, I know he's not, but I'm just saying in terms of what you'd have to go through to do a revamping of the area, it would probably be harder to deal with Willow Wind, but less expensive than all of the stuff you'd have to deal with over off this S-curve, right or wrong?
I think each area has its own pros and cons. Definitely with Willow Wind, you're going to have a larger amount of investment up front, but the luxury of dealing with one person or one entity. Meanwhile, for the S-curve, it could go to creating a corporation where essentially there's a board, which could be comprised of city leadership, business owners, that really kind of get. I think it's really kind of a domino effect where once you get the first domino to start to fall, everyone starts seeing that there's a vision for the city. And so one of the positives that we have is the 10 acres that we have set aside for the Justice Center is that if we can design it how we want it, people can start looking at that and saying, hey, I want to do something just like that.
Where's that specifically located? That corner, where's the post office?
It's directly south of the post office.
Right south. There's what's there, duplexes and so on?
That's Oak Ridge Farms is off to the east.
You mentioned kind of each of these has their own challenges, and I think with the S-curve is kind of unique separately from the others, and the fact that with all the other, you're dealing with probably one development group who's going to buy the land and develop it themselves. Whereas the vision we're trying to set with the S-curve is that we would fully anticipate that that's all going to be one-off redevelopment, but the city's going to decide if you're redeveloping that property, we want you to put the parking in the back, or we want you to put more landscaping along 58. It's not so much that we're trying to get one developer to come in and purchase all that land to redevelop it. There's a lot of piecemeal ownership over there with the exception of the Pine Street Center. But again, the city is setting what the development standards are for when somebody wants to come in and redevelop it. For example, the old Perkins building, there's a new business in there right now, which is an automotive use. And they fixed the building up pretty nicely. But it very well could have been that if that plan were in place, well, can't have parking in the front. You got to put your vehicles in the back. So that's kind of the vision we have for that area is more of kind of a one-off redevelopment, kind of similar to how Belton has attacked their downtown. Is a lot different than how like the land around the interchange we would envision that developing in terms of a process, I guess.
Just kind of to wrap up my portion of it is incentive districts. So we're kind of at a point where a lot of the existing incentive districts are either nearing the end of their life or only have a number of years left. And so that kind of goes back to our activity centers where, there may be a developer that comes in asking for incentives. And so that's kind of why we've developed these activity centers as well, is so that we can start planning for the next 20 years of incentivized development.
Any questions on the land use? I want to get into the transportation, but I want to kind of rush through it because I want to give Nate a chance to explain. The park section is pretty big. So with respect to our transportation plan, it does relate to the land use plan. One thing we found within our research is that our transportation network is pretty well built out. We've had a lot of GeoBond projects over the last couple of years that have built new roads, resurfaced roads, and so forth. So from a growth perspective, we really don't have the need to build too many new roads other than neighborhood streets and things like that. So the way we approached the transportation network was, how do we continue to improve what we have, whether it's as simple as repaving a road and just making it smoother, whether we look at beautifying portions of 58 Highway, maybe some landscape medians or improved sidewalks. But what you'll see within that plan is kind of the different corridors that we've highlighted based on their function within the network, of how much traffic they see, and their impact on kind of the image of the city, and their overall connectivity with different areas of the city, different trails, different parks. But we've highlighted the list in there and kind of given a vision and how that specific road functions, and then a list of like 4 or 5 different things the city can look at to improve the roads, whether it's reducing the number of lanes, adding landscaping along the perimeter of the road, adding a landscape median. We've also included different street enhancements like pedestrian crossings. We've done a few of those on Lucy Webb to get people across the street a little bit safer. So the difference in this plan from our previous plan is that in 2004 and 2013, it was focused on what new roads do we need to build to accommodate growth. We've already built a lot of those roads through development. And so, again, the focus of this portion is, how do we keep those well-maintained, keep them looking good, and improve the functionality, whether it's bike lanes or better crosswalks or things like that. So that's kind of the gist of the transportation section. If there's any questions, certainly want to talk about that, but I do want to give Nate plenty of time to go through the parks as well. It's a really big piece of our project.
You forgot Johnston Drive, connecting to the outer road.
It's not quite done yet.
Well, but you don't even have the little yellow dot saying that it's going to be a future road connection.
We had met with the city manager earlier, and that was one of the items that was pointed out, so appreciate that.
I will say, you just jogged. The other thing that has come into light is that recently we did purchase the land to go potentially take North Madison up to 150 as part of the settlement with the landfill. And so that was one thing, wasn't necessarily a reality when we were putting this together, and so that's one thing we do have to go back and kind of figure out. What does that potential connection to 150 mean for people coming in and out of the city, and what does that do for the S-curve as you come down Madison? So that's one thing you don't see in here, but we have plans to kind of incorporate moving forward.
All right, so we're not going to let them talk anymore so that we can all get home. I'll be done here pretty quick. So Chapter 5 is the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and the idea behind Chapter 5 was originally, like David said, this was a plan of plans, and so what we wanted to make sure is that you could, from a park board perspective, Chapter 5 literally could be pulled out of this comp plan and function and exist in and of itself, but be put back into the comp plan and coexist with all the other plans, and so they work and interweave with each other. And we feel like we've done a good job of making sure that happens. And I think if you look back at the big goals, we did kind of skip over big goal 7, but that's one of the main ones that really ties Parks and Recreation to the comprehensive plan. But if you look at the big goal 7, when you get down into the strategies, like David and Dylan were saying, the goals are high level, the strategies become more objectives, and then once you get down into the implementation, which is Chapter 6, for me it's in Chapter 5, that's where you get into the details of what the goals are. A couple quick things is this is staff driven. It's very much our desire and goals of what the Parks Department is going to look like with the help and the direction of the Park Board, what they want to see. And the main purpose of this is what we are and where we're going. So the whole idea behind this chapter was written based off an inventory of what we are and a vision for our open spaces that haven't been developed yet, which many of them are back here. On page 109, at the bottom, the plan, expectations, and outcomes. I mean, that really is the driving force of what this chapter is for us as a 20-year capital improvement plan. And we have been doing that. We literally took our capital plan and narrated that plan into developing this Chapter 5. Staffing levels, funding sources, all of the main things, once we build these parks, once we have these things in place, how are we going to maintain them? Not just with bodies, but like, what are the standards of the maintenance of them? Some areas, what our current plan is levels A, level B, and level C, and that determines how much time and effort we put into those areas. So we want to create that. This particular plan doesn't have those things in there. This plan tells us you need those things. So like a recreation business plan, we don't necessarily have one, but our recreation side is a business. It is a product that's made to provide a revenue source. This plan, this chapter, dictates that over the next 20 years or whenever we choose to do this, to have that business plan. So we have a purpose and a reason for the way we function and what what programs we do, what leagues we do, what kind of athletic fields we build, what kind of trails we build, those types of things. Ultimately, our goal with this master plan, and it's been a goal since I've been the director and with this current park board, is the ultimate goal is to be an accredited department with the National Recreation and Park Association. There are only 4 cities in the state of Missouri that have that accreditation, and we want to make sure that we are one of the first that maintain that. It's a very lengthy process, and it's difficult, and this particular chapter sets those guidelines on how to get us there. I'll flip through real quick. I just gave you a quick narrative. So pages, page 112 begins our inventory. That classifies how we look at our parks. What are mini parks, regional parks, community parks? It's not just a park. Now what do you do with it? There is a plan and a process, just like in P&Z, when you look at a property and you go through your ordinances and your codes. We have the same thing. We're just on a smaller scale within parkland that we own or are given over to maintain. Page 113 lists all of those out, and then within the inventory that begins on page 114, it gives a category. So we actually went through and inventoried every park system, and hopefully we didn't miss a whole lot. I'm sure there are certain things that we've missed that we'll have to pick up over the way or over time, but it gives a rating on how well it's maintained, how well it's not just maintained, but is it a good condition? Is it an excellent condition? Obviously, older parks are a little worn out in terms of use and need some uplift. The newer parks like TB Hanna Station and Hawk Ridge Park, they're in excellent condition because they're literally brand new. So those are the things that we look at. Let's see, yeah. And so the inventory runs through there, and it's got a pretty extensive list of all of our park system, and that was what we based our 20-year capital improvement plan on, is what are we going to do after, we look at what we have, and then we want to see what we can do, and then you base it off of what can you do in terms of dollar, people, maintenance, equipment, things of that nature. So you get down to page 122, we actually break it down into not parks, but special use areas. So that would be the amphitheater. TB Hanna Station has the rink, which is the ice rink. So that functions as a special area. The Arboretum, the fire pit, the Raymore Disc Golf Course, those are like high-level, intense areas that are within a park. And so those are the special use areas. Page 126 goes into Centerview and the activity, the RAC, which are actual facilities that we have. And so that's the inventory. That is a whole section of what we are. And then we go into recommendations on page 128. Those recommendations take park by park of things that we see what we are and what we want to become or what we want to correct or what we want to fix, what needs addressing. Those are what those recommendations are. That's what we built the capital improvement plan on. If you guys have any questions, just jump in, but I know we're getting late, so I'm going to speed through this unless you stop me. On page 132, we go into our current master plans. There's, you have to be careful when you're talking about plans. You have comp plans and master plans and park plans and stuff. This particular, we have actual park master plans, and we printed out some here. That is what we want the park to look like when we're done putting our investment into that area. So we've provided those park master plans, and these are just sketch drawings, but for all of them. So page 133 is Hawkridge Park, for example. You look at that particular map, and you see that we are close to being probably 90% complete of filling that master plan. The last part is the planned sunset extension. I can't dictate that timing, but as soon as that goes in, we add the parking lot and the pavilion on the east side of the lake. And then we pretty much have completed the master plan. You go to the next page, which is Memorial Park. There's not much to do left in Memorial Park other than just upgrades, facelifting things, replacing old items. TB Hanna Station is a huge endeavor coming up on page 135. David mentioned earlier that we do purchase some properties, and Hawkridge Park was the last large piece of property we purchased, and that's right. However, in 2016, we bought a piece of property on the corner of Olive Street and Adams, and then later on, we bought it off Adams and Maple Street, and we created TB Hanna Station, and we built that out, and we've been very successful and had a lot of national recognition on TB Hanna Station. This particular master plan contemplates continuing purchase of vacant property, which we've already bought the property west of Olive and Adams Street, and this gives a guideline of the master plan of what we want to do if we are able to purchase that extra half block, and it kind of lines that out. Obviously, they're just plans, and which is what we want to make sure these aren't set in stone, but these are guidelines to what we want to move forward to. So if myself or my staff or somebody's not here, this plan is in place, and the plan doesn't change based on the changing out of personnel. We've set the direction we want to go, and that's what this Chapter 5 does. Recreation Park is the next. We've got actually two maps of Recreation Park up here, and we did that on purpose because here in a minute we'll talk about the ranch, which is the 154 acres dedicated from the Good Ranch property down on the south part of town. That's a whole concept plan that is outlined in here. So hang with me here. When we develop the ranch, that triggers a domino in Recreation Park. Recreation Park's master plan currently is right there. So really the only thing after we're done with the pickleball courts, the expansion of the rack is down on the south of the roundabout. There's a baseball field. We would like to add a baseball field, a championship baseball field down there. We're significantly low on baseball diamonds. But we still have our soccer fields and our flag football fields over here. When the ranch comes in place, that concept plan has a complete indoor and outdoor soccer, flag football complex. Everything moves over there. That opens up Recreation Park here to add more parking and more ball fields. And so ultimately, our plan as a park board is to have a baseball park and to have a soccer or a turf field park. And that is all contingent on the timing and development of the ranch. The ranch concept plan is in here, and I believe it starts on page 141, and there's a pretty detailed outline of what we envision that park to be. And I know the park board has seen this, and we're all pretty excited about it. There's just one big problem, and that's called money. And, but we've got two things in our favor, and that is the property is dedicated to us, so we own it, and we have a plan for it. So now we just have to work the plan and work the process. And that takes us to how these other master plan of these parks work. And like I said, they do domino each other because on limited funds and limited capital dollars, you have to go with that plan, which is what our 20-year plan is. it outlines how we're gonna do things in a purpose, so we're just not pulling projects year to year, trying to figure out how we can do it. We have a purpose and a process moving forward that makes sense, and this chapter 5 is what that is. This is our 20-year plan of what we want to look like when we're done. This also includes, I'll be able to answer any questions here in a minute. I do want to talk about one more thing, which is in our community conversations, in our community surveys, one of the things that our Parks Department is, in our city as a whole, is highly touted for and commended on is our trail system. I talked a little bit about that before. We do want to continue a pretty vibrant trail system connected to our transportation system. Where we were a year ago was we had to get everything back up to snuff, and we had a very aging trail system that was highly used, and the park board and the council made that decision, like we talked earlier, to invest in it and get us at ground zero in a brand new trail system. And that's what we've done. And by the end of next year, this time next year, we will be virtually a complete trail system that's under 5 years old all across the board. This particular, starting on page 146, that outlines a trails master plan of what we want to become. And it gives out the designs and the standards. So what we're building right now meets these designs and standards that will adopt. So we're already up to standard for what we will put in place. It talks about how we accept, greenways or linear parks. In the past, a lot of our parks down in Good Parkway on the west side of town was floodplain, and we accepted a lot of that for those trails. This talks about how and what the parameters are on whether we will accept that type of property in the future. We're not saying we won't, but we're gonna have some much harder standards on how we're gonna bank that property, and if we don't like it, then we go to fee and lieu, which is all those processes that we have in place. Also, this project talks about signs. We wanna have a pretty aggressive sign program that includes our trails programs, our trail system. So all across town, you come up on trails, you can have QR codes or maps where it can link and give you miles where you want to go, how to loop through the trail system, how to navigate from bikes and pedestrian system. And so those things are coming within the next 5 years. That's in our current capital program. So those are pretty exciting too. As you go through the plan, beginning on page 151, there's a pretty detailed inventory of our trail system that gives out also mileage, distances, things like that. Keep in mind, that's what we are now, not what we're going to be. So we want to work through that process. Ultimately, what we are looking for is the ranch triggers this program, but what our trail system, our comprehensive trail system is, we want to call it from the ridge to the ranch, which is basically Hawk Ridge Park to the Good Ranch to the Ranch Park. So you can literally go to our farthest park in the north, hit the trail system, and you can ride the entirety of Raymore on trails all the way down to the lowest part of Raymore, which is the ranch. And that's what we want to be, a walkable, bikeable community, which we've been told by our community that's what we want. And so this whole trails concept is the ridge to the ranch. And anywhere in town you can hop on a trail, hit a QR code, and bring up all of those mapping systems and guide you all the way across town through our trail system. So that's a big component of our Parks Master Plan. And it is one of the things that we're pretty excited about. Like I said, before I answer any questions, our program, our plan intertwines in and of itself. Everything hinges on something else. It can domino another project, but it also can fit right into the comprehensive master plan of the city and not lose any grounds or any momentum in terms of working with their activity centers or development, because the plans, for example, parkland dedication or the trails master plan, immediately are triggered by development. And so we have these things in place and we are ready to go with that type of mapping system as well. So that is our Parks Master Plan in a nutshell. And the very last page is page 160. Those are those implementation goals. That's what takes Big Goal 7 goals and strategies and breaks them down into what are manageable objectives for our department. And so that is the closing of our master plan. And I would venture to say that this particular one will be updated and reevaluated more aggressively and more often than other plans in the comprehensive plan because of our aggressive nature in our comp plan. As soon as we get a project, it changes what our master plan looks like because those are the projects we're doing. So we're thinking about every 5 years, we go back in and actually do an update, refresh our map system, look at our 20-year plan and things of that nature, but it doesn't take its value out of our comp plan. So happy to answer any questions on that. And I just want it noted, I did all of that in about 15 minutes compared to David and Dylan's 2 hours. So a little credit there.
Well, you're used to talking a lot.
We just like to hear our voices, that's all.
Bill's questions already came out.
On the ranch, is there phases to that, or is it kind of you want the budget for everything before you start?
Well, if you're writing a check, we'll take the whole thing.
Well, yeah, right.
If you don't mind.
Hey,
If not, we'll take parts.
They have a 501c3 now, so you can do that.
well, I can get you some money. No, I'm just kidding.
Initially looking at it, ideally, a project of that nature, you're looking at anywhere from starting at 15 million up to 20, 30 easily. That particular program or part, that has phases all the way up to an actual full-blown community center, which would be the very last phase. All the other stuff would go first, but a bond, no tax increase bond or a general obligation bond to get that type of dollars up front. And that's coordinated with city council and plans that we've already got in place. Obviously, there's a timeline, so the Justice Center property is purchased, that's in the queue for what's coming up, and we recognize that fact. So the concept plan for this incorporated things that we can do on a small scale basis and start using the property without having to sit and wait for a $10 million bond to be able to do all of it. Part of that includes,
Folks want to hear?
What's that?
Want to hear what you're saying?
well, you should have said.
There may be somebody listening.
I'm sorry. So part of that is like an MOU with the school district because Bridal Ridge is right there. So utilizing parking lots, sharing that type of thing, getting us started. Asphalt's expensive, concrete's expensive, those types of things. So if we can come up with programs and partnerships that we can get into that property quickly and do some smaller things to make use of it, that will help ignite the fire in terms of getting on the queue for the full-blown development of it.
Yeah, that was really, I was just asking because I'm heartbroken about the disc golf course. And I noticed that the ranch has where you're moving the new one, so I didn't know when.
Oh, we're not moving it. You'll get 2.
Well, when are you gonna, we're still missing holes on the front 9.
Right now.
Right now, yeah.
That'll be out to bid on Thursday.
Okay, then take your time on the ranch then. No.
So now you're writing a check.
For the 2 holes we're missing, maybe, I don't know.
Excellent.
Well, I've talked enough tonight, so I'll skip over the implementation section. It kind of speaks for itself for how we kind of move forward. Appreciate everyone's time and patience and your evening at this point. If you have any specific comments, I know Dylan, Nate, and I have written down most of the questions that you've asked, but this is very still much a draft, so feel free to send us comments or questions or revisions or thoughts you have tonight. We appreciate all your time. I'll skip over again. I provide it to the P&Z board every month, but since we don't get to meet with the park board very often, just a copy of our monthly report and kind of an update on all the projects that we've approved and kind of ongoing over the last couple of years. So again, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to Dylan or I, and we will answer whatever question you have. But there's no other further business. I suppose we can stand adjourned for tonight.
Do you need a formal motion to end the meeting?
That was just a work session.
Oh, okay, because she opened it, so I didn't know if we needed to officially close it.